So I'm going to talk about my journey and how I discovered my limits, but how I also understood that the limits were self-imposed, and I completely connected with the previous speaker's comment about unhealed trauma and how this can become your personality. And through your personality, it can become the culture of an organisation, and that trauma can then pervade that organisation in a negative way, which is the opposite of the values that most of us today will want to ascribe to. But it was definitely a journey that I went on, and I've come to a good place. And I'm going to just briefly talk to you about what happened to me and what I learned as a result of coming to terms with that trauma. So here's my family at different stages, the past and the present. And family is where this started. Childhood is where my journey started. I was brought up in a part of East Leeds called Seacroft, and racism was a day-to-day experience. There were 3 black families on our estate, and it was a 4,000 house estate. And so we were regularly faced with direct and indirect racism on a daily basis. And that is traumatic, and that has an impact on your health and well-being and on your mental health and well-being. And there's been lots and lots of emerging research about that. But as well as the trauma of racism, I also experienced the trauma of sexual abuse. So I was abused by the next door neighbour when I was a really small child of about 5 or 6, and I didn't tell anybody about that. And I didn't tell anybody about that because I didn't believe that I would be believed, but also because in the 60s and 70s, that stuff really wasn't spoken about. My mum was a big Catholic, and that was not something that I knew would be acceptable for me to discuss in our family. And so I didn't. And I carried that responsibility of the abuse with me into adulthood. And when I was 17, I went on to meet a much older man who I then married, and I experienced then 10 years of domestic abuse. Again, I didn't talk about that. I didn't tell anybody about that. I had a pattern, and I had to break that pattern, but I didn't know then that I was in a cycle, that I was in a pattern of abuse, and I didn't understand that I had power and control in that setting. But trauma can and does limit your potential. It takes away your power, and it stops you living the life that you want to live. It stops you honouring the values that you want to honour. And it really, again, resonated with me when the previous speaker said that we see things not as they are, but as we are. Because I saw things very much through the lens of my own victim status. And I didn't make me a victim in the beginning, but I did make me a victim for more years than I needed to be. And as a result of that, I was on the defensive. I became part of the problem. So in my late 30s, I became chief exec of a mental health charity called Touchstone. And I believe that because of the trauma that I was carrying and because of the failure to acknowledge and recognise that I had been damaged, both as a child, as an adult, and that was affecting me, my leadership, my values, my ability to be the person that I wanted to be and live the life that I wanted to be. I controlled myself and my environment and sought to protect myself from further attack. What I didn't see is that I then became abusive in my leadership of that organisation. I did not perceive myself as a bully or as a negative impact on that organisation. I did not believe that I was part of the problem. But as time went on, the values that I was espousing and I believed that I was honouring, I was in conflict. And as a result of that, my mental health, which had begun to emerge really in my very early teens when I attempted to take my own life, began to impact on me more and more. I was having suicidal thoughts. My depression was off the scale. I was having panic attacks and experienced big anxiety bouts. And all this was because of the conflict that I was experiencing, because what I was saying and what I was doing were not in harmony. I didn't have that balance. I wasn't grounded. And what happened is I came to a crossroads. I was in deep distress and I didn't know which way to turn. Organisationally, something very big happened and staff went on strike. We'd initiated a big peer review. And because of my controlling ways, because I was not honouring my value, I reflect that there were things that I could and should have done during that process. I wasn't able to do because I was protecting myself from attack. And actually, what I was doing was I was preventing myself from giving love and therefore from receiving love. And the worst case scenario happened both at work, but also internally. It was happening with me in my personal life, and I was becoming more and more distressed. Fortunately, I was given an opportunity to receive some coaching from my trustees, and I think they recognised the dichotomy that I was facing, the personal challenges that I was facing, and they offered me this gift of coaching, which I took. And it was through that experience, through that gift of expression through coaching, that I was able to talk about what had happened to me as a child. And at this time, I was nearly 45, and so I had not spoken about that for nearly 40 years. I'd never spoken about it, and the relief, the release that I experienced through talking about those experiences with somebody with such skill and such care, and I was able to use that information and the gift of self-knowledge and self-awareness that I gained, that I was able to change my patterns for good. And I was able to build on what's strong. And again, these are all echoes of what has already been said by the previous speaker. And I decided to change the way that I was behaving and to align it with the way that I wanted to be seen and I wanted to behave. I wanted to be able to be in harmony and in balance, but I knew that that was going to be a difficult journey, but one that I needed to undertake. And what I did is I began to speak to people about my lived experience. And through that process at work, to strangers, in public, I talk openly now about my lived experience, and I use it as a gift. It is my gift to you to understand that when you know your weaknesses, you can turn them into strengths. Because if we don't face our fears, they become our limits. And I was afraid of the stigma. I was afraid of being blamed. As a child in a Catholic household, shame and blame are constants. And I allowed that to prevent me from freeing myself from the chain of the oppressors, the abuse that had happened to me throughout my life. I'm now free of those chains. I have now accepted that rather than limit me, they've now widened my potential. They've allowed me to become the person, the woman that I am today. And I share this gift with you in the hope that you will take something of what I've said into your own life, into your own lived experience, and it will help you get through those dark days as it's helped me. I was in the darkness, and now I'm walking into the light. Thank you.